Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink, it is time for some PathOfExile discussion. Sometimes a bad patch can have some good changes in it, and I wanted to talk about the Divine Orb Exalted Orb swap. Well, I think it's generally worked pretty well, but where there's a couple of things that didn't work. So firstly, for those of you that missed the main news or that have taken this league entirely off, PathOfExile changed from an Exalted Orb based economy to a Divine Orb based economy, and the key reason for this was that the meta mods were changed from being denominated in Exalted Orbs to being denominated in Divine Orbs instead. These are prefixes can't be changed, suffixes can't be changed, can have up to 3 crafted mods, cannot roll attack mods, and cannot roll caster mods. All of these had their cost changed from Exalted Orbs in the past, or in one case from Blessed Orbs, to now cost either 1 or 2 Divine Orbs. This means that where historically Divine Orbs have been around 12 Chaos Orbs in leagues, this league they've been closer to 200 for most of the time. At the time that this was announced, there was a lot of doom and gloom posts over on the PathOfExile subreddits, and a lot of wild predictions of 400 plus Chaos Orbs for Divine Orbs this league, Exalted Orbs being like 1 or 2 Chaos Orbs at most, and also of people being locked out of being able to use meta mods at all. None of these have turned out to be true, and the reality is that we've got something reasonably similar to an exact swap between the two, with Divine Orbs a little bit more expensive than Exalted Orbs normally got. Additionally, there's been a bunch of flow-on effects. These have included positive things, like a bunch of unique items that used to be garbage being worth picking up again, and also some negative things like Harbinger content being killed and a fairly nasty shock to the standard economy. I want to go through all of this, and ultimately my conclusion has been that I've liked this change, although I can certainly understand why some people haven't. So what this change has meant is that the Exalted Orb has been very cheap compared to historic prices. In previous leagues, they've been anywhere from 100 to 180 Chaos Orbs most leagues, and this league they were mostly around the 18 mark. They were lower early, they're lower now, but they were mostly around the 18 for most of the time that people were at endgame in this league. Now this has made a lot of Benchcrafts that were previously completely uneconomical to use a lot cheaper than they used to be. So for example, I wanted to consider a couple of people's early league weapons. Dire Hunger Demon Dagger and Morbid Scratch Imperial Claw are 2 items that are both stood up on the trade site. Morbid Scratch it looks like hasn't been used in 2 months. What I assume happened here is that player quit the league fairly early, after rolling Morbid Scratch and then ultimately replacing it with something better. In any previous league, you wouldn't have wanted to craft these weapons. The reason being that they have the 16 to 20% increased attack speed mod on them. This costs an Exalted Orb to apply on the crafting bench. In previous leagues, this would have been 180 Chaos investment on a weapon that really in the past would have just been surpassed by a 100 Chaos item that was crafted via different means. As a result, people would either not craft a weapon like this, or if they did craft it, they'd be doing so knowing full well that they're just throwing currency down the gurgler. What this has done is it's meant that a whole bunch of previously wasteful Benchcrafts have become really worthwhile using. So there is attack speed Benchcraft, there is 100 to 129% increased physical damage, there is +2 to the level of socketed support gems, there is hits cannot be evaded, there's a bunch of other ones as well. These previously were very expensive crafts and they're now much more affordable, and they're something that you can use maybe not on your first endgame weapon, but certainly the first weapon that you attempt to take down Shaper Guardians with. And that's something that's really useful. It smooths out that part of gearing progression, and honestly I think that is the single best thing about this change. However, for all the positives associated with this change, there have been 2 definite negatives. The first one was the implications for standard players, the second one was the implications for Harbinger content. Let's start with the Harbingers. The Harbinger content has been rendered largely irrelevant this league. This is something GGG got really wrong with this change. It's funny that Harbinger League is something that seems to have grown on people over time. At the time of 3.0, it was widely called Garbinger League. It was generally like the core state of the game at that time, but the Harbinger content was something that most people felt was really lackluster. However, over time, it has developed a significant fan base, and whilst I'm not one of the people that really enjoys the Harbinger content, it was definitely something I would occasionally dip my teeth into. Well, this league, there is basically no reward for doing so. In the past, there's been 4 main sources of rewards for Harbinger content. One of them has been Ancient Orbs and Shards, one of them has been Harbinger Orbs and Harbinger Shards, and one of them has been the lottery odds of getting a Mirror Shard. And then the 4th one, and this is the thing that holds it all together and is worth more than all 3 of those combined, is the Exalted Shards. Well, now Exalted Shards are basically only worth about a Chaos Orb or so. As a result, Harbinger content has lost the meat and potatoes that were keeping it lucrative to run. And because of that, it feels completely unrewarding. I'm glad that I'm not one of the people that likes Harbinger content because it got absolutely butchered. So let's have a look at some of the other consequences of this change. I want to take a look at a particular item that's being used a little bit more this league than in the past. This is a very common unique item, And I was having a look for the unidentified versions that are available in trade. This here is the only unidentified Divination Distillate that is currently online, and it's being sold for 20 chaos. You might be asking, why is this 20 chaos when most people's loot filter don't have it on them? Well, the reason for that is that it is 1 in 55 to be perfectly rolled, and if you do hit one that's perfectly rolled, it's worth more than 1,000 chaos. Additionally, if you get one off a perfect roll, or even two off a perfect roll, you're still looking at something that's pretty valuable. So here you'll see the prices for all of the Divination Distillates that are online at the time I'm recording this video that have a perfect or second from perfect roll for quantity and a perfect or second from perfect roll for rarity. What this means is that when a unique item drops that is a wide roll range, such as Divination Distillate, where there is a substantial difference between a perfect roll and a very bad roll, these items are worth picking up. They have become loot, where in 3.18 they weren't. A quick note during editing, I chose to talk about Divination Distillate here because I'd had one drop and I was quite surprised at how much it sold for after I identified it and it was 1 point off perfect. However, I do think it's worth saying that everything I'm saying here would apply to unique items that weren't indirectly buffed by mechanics changes in 3.19 or directly buffed through changes to the unique item stats. So for example, Replica Frost Breath is something else that I've had drop this league. I dropped a perfectly rolled on attack speed version of it, and it sold for just under 3 Divine Orbs at the time, whereas a terrible roll on the item was 50 Chaos. So that should give you a bit of a sense that this is definitely a universal thing. It is true on any of the rarer uniques that people genuinely want to use, and that people really care about one mod on them, not just Divination Distillate, which is the example I chose to use. In 3.18, Divination Distillate was something you could very safely take off your loot filter on every character, and you would never be sad that you missed it. Even if there was one that rolled perfectly, had you picked it up and sold it, you probably only would have got 30 or 40 chaos for it. And ultimately that wasn't incentive enough to pick them all up, so you treated Divination Distillate as though it was not loot at all. Whereas now, if you pick one up and you don't identify it, you can just turn around and sell it to another player who's willing to take that gamble, and like you see here, you can potentially get 20 chaos for it. In fact, if you do buy them at 20 chaos and you identify them, and you throw away all the ones that are not perfectly rolled or 1 or 2 off perfectly rolled, you will actually make profit on that at the moment. And that's something that creates a use for previously alch shard tier uniques. The other thing, of course, that comes up from this is the 3-for-1 vendor recipe for uniques is now useful again. This is where you vendor 3 copies of the same unique, none of them corrupted, and you receive back a new version of that unique, which will have a new Sacred Orb roll and a new Divine Orb roll on it. Essentially, you can see this as being the equivalent of sacrificing 2 copies of the unique in order to apply both a Sacred Orb, if appropriate, and a Divine Orb to the third one. And again, this is something that is causing a number of uniques that previously weren't loot at all, they were just ground clutter, to become genuine loot again. As for some of the items that this is really noticeable on, Replica Frostbreath, a Fulcrum where the 3 conversion mods add up to 100% or more is worth a lot more than any other Fulcrum. A Brass Dome where the maximum elemental resistances mod is 5% is worth much more than a different Brass Dome, and a Crest of Desire that has 8 to the level of Socketed Gems, and anything 40% or more to quality is worth quite a bit more as well than a standard Crest of Desire. So that's just some examples, but I'm sure that you'll find plenty more. The other thing that's been really noticeable this league is that players have largely lost the ability to apply Divine Orbs to their items unless those items are extraordinarily good. So whilst you might apply a Divine Orb to a Mage Blood that's imperfectly rolled, or even to an Ashes of the Stars, you're not going to be applying a Divine Orb to a 200 Chaos item in order to try and make it into a better version of itself. However, you have gained the ability to apply Exalted Orbs to your existing rare items. So ultimately what this is going to mean is that you might end up with a rare item that has a roll range of 46 to 48 cold resist on it, and you're stuck with a 46 and you can't economically upgrade that to 48. However, on your weapon, you might apply an Exalted Orb to it and get an unlucky result of 11% cold resist. And when that happens, well, suddenly you're ahead by more than what you lost on your belt. And that's something that's happened a lot for me this league. Just the ability to exalt 3 modules and not worry about the cost is something that is a substantial improvement. In previous leagues, exalting a 3 module was pretty much always just throwing currency down the gurgler, unless that jewel was already a 3 to 4,000 chaos item, in which case then it could be a reasonable risk to take. But now it's something that's much more viable than it's been in the past. So what do I think wasn't done well? I've already mentioned Harbingers. I think that Harbingers really need to have Divine Shards added to them. There's a whole bunch of shards that drop there that are completely useless. I don't think anyone would care if Engineer's Orbs were removed entirely from the game, and obviously engineered shards as well. I don't think that anyone would mind particularly much if regal shards went away. Given that regal shards are one of the rarer shards you get from Harbingers, I think it would be perfectly reasonable to say that every time a regal shard would drop currently, instead there's an 8 to 20% chance, depending on the exact numbers, GGG could work this out, to drop that number of divine shards, and otherwise it drops completely nothing. If this isn't done, I don't feel like Harbingers serve any purpose, and I don't think that they should have support on the passive tree, and I don't think that they should have a scarab dedicated to them. They should just have the loot that otherwise is tied to them, such as beachhead maps, given to other mechanics, and then perhaps be removed from the game entirely, because they don't really serve any significant purpose otherwise. I do think it's worth quickly saying a couple of words about the effect of this change on Standard. In Standard, a lot of people play the game every now and again, and broadly speaking, it was pretty bad for a lot of Standard players who had their wealth mostly tied up in Exalted Orbs to have this go down. The value of an Exalted Orb in Standard has fallen by approximately 83% over the last little while, and I don't think it's going to recover anytime soon. So for someone like me, actually, that has something like 500 or 600 Exalted Orbs in Standard, this was a pretty big reduction in my purchasing power in that league. Now, it doesn't bother me because I don't really play it. On the flip side, there would be some individuals who had a lot of Divine Orbs for whatever reason, and those players did pretty well out of it. They gained sort of 1200% returns on their investment. Now, I think that this is a problem in some situations, and other times it's just one of those unfortunate side effects of a change. So this is a problem if there is any suspicion that there was insider knowledge of the change. And having a look at the price graphs here, I have to say that I can pretty comprehensively rule that out. I used to play EVE Online, and EVE Online did occasionally have scandals where people with insider information seem to have potentially acted on various market information before the game developer made it public. And when that happened, the price graph looked very different to this. What you would see, let's say that someone did have insider knowledge of this, and they went and cashed out 5,000 Exalted Orbs in Standard into Chaos, or even into Divines, you would have seen around August 7 that there would have been a substantial downtick in the value of Exalted Orbs. And you would have seen a comparable uptick in Divine Orbs, assuming they were to buy those, and this would have been really, really noticeable. This hasn't happened, and instead, the instant the knowledge went public, the very next few hours, everything started to change. Based on that, I don't think there's any insider knowledge. Could GGG have done things differently? Yes, they could have. They could have given 3 months notice of the changes, and in that case, the change would have been more gradual because Standard players would have been able to spend through their existing Exalted Orbs over time, using them to fund meta mods, or those that had no short-term use for them would still find a fair bit more of a market for them while they were selling them in this period. And you'll see that Exalted Orbs hit around 60 chaos for a period for the last few days that they could be used to fund meta mods. So they were still definitely being used by a lot of players at that point. So that period that was 8 days long could have been extended over 90. Would this have made things fundamentally different? I don't think it would have made all that much of a difference for Standard players. Some individuals would have done better with that system. Some individuals would have missed out on opportunities that they found in the current one. But fundamentally, I don't think it would have made a big difference. And that's, again, coming from my experience from EVE Online, where I used to play a lot of market PvP. And in particular, I would be one of the first people reading any patch notes that were published. And I would be quickly looking at them and saying, okay, so the game developers have decided they want to buff this particular type of weapon. Let's say they wanted to buff Galente weapons. Well, at this point, I'm going to go not buy the actual weapons because someone with deeper pockets than me has already bought that market out. Instead, I'm going to find what the component is that's central to producing those things, and I'm going to buy all of the key components to them. And then I'm going to look to immediately resell them to someone else that is doing exactly the same thing. I'd be looking to make the short-term sure flip, and then I would let someone else take the long-term risk with it if they wanted to. Having seen how that sort of thing works in practice, I'm pretty confident that if GGG had given 90 days notice of this, we still would have seen pretty much the same effect take place. There would have been a precipitous drop-off in the value of the Exalted Orb immediately as everyone that had a speculative holding of them got rid of them, and then you would have seen this floor kick in from the continued use of them, but that just would have lasted for longer. So ultimately, I don't think that that would have alleviated the concerns that some people have that their Standard wealth got burnt. Ultimately, if GGG decided to make this change, and as I said, I'm pretty content with the change overall, then this was going to result in being a net negative for a bunch of individuals in Standard. There wasn't really anything that they could do to mitigate that. The other thing I think GGG should reconsider, of the 5 meta mods, 4 of them make thematic sense to be linked to the Divine. One of them, however, still makes thematic sense to be linked to the Exalted Orb, and that is Multimod. Multimod being the benchcraft that says can have up to 3 crafted modifiers. When this is used not in conjunction with the other meta mods, It's probably the weakest of the lot, and it's also the one that is most useful early in the gearing process. I would be in favour of turning can have up to 3 crafted modifiers back into an Exalted Orb craft, so one that costs 2 Exalted Orbs, which would then be something that would thematically make a lot of sense, and that would also help with making early game gearing smoother. However, I would also be in favour of keeping the costs of metamod multimods at the same price they currently are. So metamod multimods is something like can have up to 3 crafted modifiers, then craft prefixes cannot change, then craft suffixes cannot change. That sort of combination, I think, is actually right at 6 Divine Orbs, or can have up to 3 crafted modifiers, suffixes can't change, and cannot roll attack mods is another example of something that feels right at its current cost. And so in order to keep those costs where they are, GGG could actually add 2 different versions of the multimod. They could have one that says can have up to 3 crafted modifiers that do not cost Divine Orbs, and that one costs 2 Exalted Orbs. And then they could have a second version that still costs 2 Divine Orbs and does exactly what is in the game now. That'd be something that would allow a little bit more flexibility in early game gearing, but without adding any more power at the top end, which a lot of the changes in 3.19 were clearly aimed at doing. Anyways, that's my thoughts on a change that's been pretty controversial with a lot of people. Having played with it now for 8 weeks or so, I do think it has made the game better. It's not something that's been implemented flawlessly, but I do think that it is better than the 3.18 situation was, and I think it could be made better again if GGG decide that they want to do something about the Harbinger problem and making Harbingers useful again. That's all I've got. May your Exalted Orbs have interesting results.